All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Wireheads. We're still doing this thing. We aren't giving up any time in the near future, so you might as well get used to us. We're kind of like that bad burned electronic smell that you just can't get out. I'm Emmerron. With me is my co-host Diamond Dust. And seeing as this is an odd numbered episode, I have topic number 1 tonight. And unlike some other weeks, I've remembered to change my topic box before going live with this. So we have tonight GM encounter design. So we are going to be talking more to GMs, and we're going to be talking a little more about kind of what goes into building an encounter and how to make that sort of fair. Like, you know, fair gets boring, right? It's not always fun. And so in topic number 2 this week, we are going to go over some more of that. Diamond has a topic this week for making hard choices. So after you've watched this, if you are on YouTube, please go over to her channel and watch that second episode. It should be linked, or the second part of the episode rather, should be linked in the description down below. Of course, if you're here with us on Twitch Live, or if you're listening to us over on Spotify, this is not going to bother or affect you in any way, shape, or form. You'll just carry on through and just get to that second half of the episode naturally. We also do have some fun, exciting news to announce at the end of tonight's episode. So definitely, if you are hanging out with us, make sure to listen to the end, because it is an opportunity for you as the audience to participate with us in an upcoming little episode that we've got coming up. The lead I will give you is we have another interview. I will not say with whom till the end. So with that said, let's kind of dive into the topic. So GM encounter design, I know that this is probably one of those things that I feel like most GMs struggle with the first time they try to do it in any system. Cyberpunk is not the only system where I've seen this, and I'd certainly argue that there are plenty of other systems where this is more of a problem than in Red. Red does a pretty good job of kind of balancing out the encounters and things that it has, the tools it gives us for keeping that fairly consistent, and the experience, fairly, well balanced for players works, right? Which I know we, a few weeks ago, we kind of snubbed D&D, and here's where I'm going to do it again, because D&D's CR system just doesn't work. It's
garbage. It's garbage.
It's not even a system. It fails to work. It's like in any meaningful way, it doesn't function. So this is where we're going to start talking tonight about how we start designing an encounter. So I think the first kind of element that we want to look at is what exactly is the environment that your players are in. So Diamond, I'd love to hear how you approach this, but I know, like, when I first start, my first thought is like, who are the, well, thank you so much for the sub. I appreciate that. Do you look at chat during this? Yes, we do. We do look. And, by the way, chat, whether you're over on Diamond's stream or you're here on mine, if you submit, questions to our chat during, the stream tonight, we will get to those all at the end. We may cover less questions in the middle just because we typically do want to save them more for the end. But if it is particularly pertinent, we may bring it up sooner. But definitely, yeah, feel free to ask us questions. If you are listening to this after the fact, whether on YouTube or on Spotify, we do have a email, wireheads pod@googlegroups.com. If you send us an email there, or there's an opportunity at the end of the Spotify episodes to send us questions for Q&A, or on YouTube if you put it down in the comments. All of that, we read it all, we look at it all. So if you do have questions, please do ask. we would love to answer the topics that you want to hear about, whether in more detailed segments or as kind of one-off question answers at the end of our show. So back to encounter design. So like kind of my first step that I like to look at is, what is the environment that my players are in to start with, and how smart does that make the enemies, right? And also, consequently, an element of that is how reputable or known are the players at that point. Because obviously the less known the players are, the less prepared the enemies will likely be to deal with their particular brand of bullshit, to put it mildly, right? If they've got some borged out half cyber psycho who can dodge bullets, the gonks who don't know them won't know that that's coming their way, and they won't do the things they can to prepare for it. If they are smarter, though, like a corporation or a group that the players have maybe tangled with previously, that does change that dynamic a little bit. It shifts it more toward them maybe having some of that preparedness out of the way. So, but Diamond, I'd love to hear kind of like where do you begin when you're first kind of aligning an encounter?
Okay, so when it comes to producing encounters for me, I look for a couple of different things, and it's how dangerous I want to make the job, and also when I look at, like, you know, groups that they're tangling with, what kind of firepower this group might have, what kind of sizing that these groups tend to travel in. Like, for example, tonight you guys were dealing with the Neighborhood Watch PMC. They're going to be in larger hordes of people. May not be well equipped, but they're actually surprisingly well equipped. But that's still something to be figured out.
Yeah.
But
they didn't stop us from leaving a whole lot of bodies in our wake tonight. That's for sure.
But for example, like if you're going out to go fight a group of scavs, well, they're scavs. They're when it comes to me, and like I seem to do really, really well with creating scav encounters. So I'll use that as my example. Mm-hmm. There are two things that are known about scavs. One, like all their equipment, it's garbage. It's garbage. But the upside for them, they travel in large groups. There tends to be large groupings of scavs. They tend to take over an entire little spot. And they're like roaches. Where you see one, there's going to be a bunch more. And, well, that's how I tend to plan scav encounters, is it's going to be overwhelming numbers versus overwhelming firepower.
Sure.
Whereas, you know, NCPD, on the other hand, it might be a group of 2 to 4 officers, like, out in the Glen at any given time.
Mm-hmm. But all of them would probably be more moderately equipped, like where they're not going to be on the lowest end of firepower. They're also not going to be like carrying rocket launchers into combat with them. Like,
oh no,
yeah.
Now, rocket launchers. Actually, that reminds me. Sometimes I like to throw a wrench into combat. Fair. Usually, I tend to keep things pretty like, you know, I tend to follow the rubric of you know, 1 moot to 1 edge runner, or 1 lieutenant to 2 edge runners. But did you know, like in the case of rocket launchers, there is the ever so handy dandy Gunmart Engage. This totally reliable rocket launcher I nailed one of my Start Playing groups with, rolling a perfect 30 on the dice. Well, I caused a lot of critical injuries to happen because of, you know, armor-piercing rockets. So
86 is a lot of damage.
Yes. So at the end of the day, when you look at your groups, figure out like what kind of resources they have access to. I don't mind changing up what is in there. Hell, even in the back of the book when they talk about like Night City street encounters, like gang wars, they talk about what normally these guys are carrying on them, or what kind of armor they're wearing when they go out into gang conflicts. So with that in mind, just see what fits your setting, and also there should be a reason that those people should be occupying that space, whether that's home, whether that's a place that they're working at, or perhaps they're being paid off to guard something.
Sure. Well, and I think that kind of leads me to sort of the next step in my planning. What options are available for the players to deal with the encounter? Because when we're planning as part of like a bigger adventure, right? Typically, and I think I may have mentioned this before, I definitely know in some of my other instructional videos on my channel, I've talked about this. But we follow the beat chart, right? So the idea of like, you're alternating cliffhangers and developments. And if you have a cliffhanger, it means it's an uncertain resolution, but there are more than one way, or there's more than one way that the situation can resolve, right? So whether that is a social sort of like they bribed them or negotiated the conflict away, or they have to actually resort to violence and shoot and hit and whatever, violently harm or even kill the opposition to get clearance. That's also something I tend to try and like think out ahead of time, is what is the enemy force at the very least at like a general level willing to accept as a sort of like success condition for the players, right? What does that tolerance level look like? Because to your point, Diamond, like if they're defending home, that's gonna be tooth and nail. They're gonna fight to the death. They're gonna have an overwhelming sort of resistance that they play to try and get the party out, right? Whereas in the event of it's just a job, right? Like they are pulling third shift at the factory and the crew rolls up and they're armed to the fucking teeth. Like I said, one of them's a half cyber psycho that could probably split this guard in half if he tried hard enough. That guard doesn't want to fucking die. That guard's just here for a paycheck, man. Like they're gonna follow the the advice you get if you've ever worked retail or a gas station or something. You come in and you're getting robbed, you let the thieves come in, you let them rob you. You do not put up resistance. You just let them in, and whatever happens after that point, you wash your hands of it, because the paycheck ain't worth that, So that's kind of another thing to kind of bear in mind, is what is the oppositional force willing to concede on? What's their breaking point, right? Is it they don't view this of dire importance? Is it they will break once they're hurt bad enough, or will they fight to the death? Because again, a reminder is that enemies in this game are real people. They're not supposed to be just meat bags of HP and gear that the players will roll over and then scav later. Though that may still happen anyway. Your players might just roll over them. They might see one of them's got that Perseus that they've always wanted, and they may deign it necessary that they flatline that guy so that Perseus is no longer the gonk they just killed. No longer belongs to them, belongs to the player now. So that is also a good thing, I think, to bear in mind when you're deciding what an encounter will shape up to be. But yeah, Diamond, I'd also love to hear kind of your thoughts. Like once you've established kind of the parameters, kind of what's your kind of next steps when you start narrowing down the focus?
Usually for me, when I look at like the win parameters of a fight, I look at how overwhelming of a force is the player showing to be. Like, is it just enough that it's to a point that like these guys understand that this is not their fight to win today, that that turning around and running might be a better choice for them? Which, I mean, we've seen that happen from time to time already tonight.
Yeah.
I mean, let alone Star threatening to just drop a grenade right at his feet, an armor-piercing grenade right at his feet. Just like, okay, all right.
This dude's crazy. Back up, yeah.
He means it.
Yeah.
And then like some of these like really low level grunts just like, yeah. Head on down to Bucks for Bodies, where your body count equals catching. Oh my God, Voltus. I mean, if you got that kind of mentality, I guess. But
come on down to Savage Docks, where your parts are our profit.
And let's see, what else is there? Oh, I suppose one of the other factors I look into it is like, if the enemy decides that this is too big of a problem for them, they will just back off until either help arrives or they fight another day. But also on top of that, sometimes the party can just be a bit intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
That it's just like, not every fight's going to end in, a drag out to the death. Sometimes it is simply nothing more than just giving, giving that red chromer that look of just, I will fuck you up. Don't give me a reason. Or just give me one reason, I'll fucking do it. Yeah, and right. It'll send them turn-tail running.
Yeah, you got two choices. You either become a smear on the wall, or you can run the other way with your tail between your legs. I will only give you this chance once.
Now, if you want to try to intimidate Max Tack, be my guest, or intimidate Crusher from Maelstrom, be my guest. Good luck.
You're not going to do it. Whatever you threaten those kinds of forces with, whatever you're trying to sell them, they are not going to buy that shit. I don't care how tough you think you are. They ain't gonna budge on that shit. Even if you succeed a face down or something, like, they'll take the penalty and they'll fight on, because in their minds they can't lose, right? Because you are the intended next level down, the next link down on the food chain to them. So yeah, yep. It's very much that is a good thing to keep in mind as well.
But yeah, and that's kind of how I look at it. Also, something else I like to take in mind is like external issues causing the fights to take a turn, whether it be the weather, like sometimes maybe the blood rain starts coming down and everyone decides this is not a good time to fight and it ends in a draw, or sometimes some pesky wannabe heroes coming in off the street, getting in the middle of a fight between the edge runners and the gang, and then oh boy, now NCPD's crying for help because one of their rookies got in the mess.
Right. Well, and it's you almost depending on how deranged your players are. I play at tables where the player base is at least somewhat deranged. It seems. Oh. It's like, I run a table where that can be the case, although this season's been a little less than last, but like, even then, you just are at a table that is like, everyone's empathy 2 or lower, everyone is like, got no moral qualms about doing some fucked up shit. That blood rain starts coming down, and the party might just use it to their advantage. They might strip the dude of his protective gear and just throw him out into the rain and pin him down there while they wear the stuff that keeps them alive. I'm reminded of because Diamond, have you ever played Death Stranding? Have you ever played or like watched any of that? Okay. Yep. So there's a scene where they make, and I'm not gonna spoil this for people who haven't played and might be looking to. It's a great game. I know it was memed on a lot, but I really do quite like it. The storytelling is great. There's a scene where a character is forced to take off all of their protective gear and walk through this rain that ages you, timefall, they call it, to retrieve something. And that's like a form of like torture, essentially. And blood rain is kind of in that same category of, you do not want to be out in that shit in clothes, much less naked, which is effectively what this character was. So like I'm just saying, like, if you present that opportunity to your players, be prepared for them to get creative in ways that you might be shocked by. maybe not. Maybe you know your players well, like I typically do, but like there are some things that I know I've been party to that has had Diamond going, oh, that's what we're doing. And I know I've also been on the receiving end of that from my table. I've done that to my former, or not former, but my IRL GM as well in some of the former campaigns we've run, where he's like, oh, that's how that's going to go. All right, then. So, like, yeah, understand, like, that as a player, that is probably one of the best things you can do is if your GM has to raise an eyebrow and go, oh, then you've probably done something right.
Or you may have done something that's like nearing a line or a veil. It's like, oh, okay, all right.
Yeah,
oh.
it is important. Yeah, and this is where we can have a brief aside. I know we want to talk about this in a future episode as well. But safety tools, this is where they come into play in a big way. So if you know at a table that you're at, like that there are acts that go beyond the pale for one or more of the people in the group, be conscious of that for sure. Like GMs and players alike, because I know as a GM, I haven't had as much of this more recently, but I know like back when I was newer to GMing, that's a pretty easy faux pas to make, that you go too far, right? You push something too far, you push into certain subject matter to a degree that it's no longer tasteful or comfortable for the group that you're playing with. So definitely a good thing to keep in mind as well. But yeah, as far as kind of the next stage of planning, what I like to look at in an encounter, beyond like the external environmental factors, is also like, what tools am I willfully giving my players, right? Like, what kind of cover are they going to have? Is the thing they're walking into going to be more of like an open shooting gallery, or is it going to be something where there's like a lot of things they can duck behind and it's a bit more of a combat maze, right? A little more trenchy in the way that they kind of like come out and work through things. And this is something where, like, again, like depending on if you are running a gig, like where the players are, going into a building versus going into the street and having a shootout, this is all going to be somewhat dictated by your players and where they kind of have chosen the fight, or where the fight has found them, obviously. But in those more like tailor-built encounters, especially for things when we start getting near like boss fights and stuff like that, that's more where we start talking about, what tools are you giving to them? This is where like the Netrunner can really shine in. If you've given them a net architecture, what is in that boss room that might help the players if the Netrunner gets to it first, right? Whether that's like a drone or a turret, or how even cameras that give the crew like some enhanced information, so when they're prepping for whatever that fight's going to be, they can go in knowing a little more than they otherwise would. But yeah, there's like a couple different elements to that that ultimately kind of are going to depend on like how balanced you want the fight to be in terms of whether it's even, like where either party could come out and win, or if it's more leaned in the player's favor or more in the opponent's favor. And I know like that's going to more be kind of talked about in the back half of the episode, because when we get to the far end of that, where like the enemies are far favored based on the design, or that's what you're trying to set up, that's where we start setting up those more difficult choices. But let's talk about like when we're setting up a fair fight. So Diamond, how do you weigh it out when you're like building an encounter in the context of like a wider adventure where obviously, you could have multiple combats or whatever? How do you, I guess, decide for yourself what is too far and what is not enough? Like, how do you find the happy medium for yourself there?
So when the way I scale this out, it really depends on like what I'm looking for. So we're gonna say looking at a very fair 1-to-1 fight, of course. In the case of a netrunner, it's like your rank 4 netrunner can make their way through a standard net architecture. You follow the rubric for a standard net architecture, and for me, when I think fair, it's just literally following the rubric.
Sure.
What they have laid out. However, I do think it is okay if the party happens to have just a wee bit more firepower, or they might have a couple nice extra things on them that, I'll throw, one cheap rocket launcher or maybe a grenade or two amongst the guys might not be too much of an issue. And it sometimes takes that that solo who thinks they're just a little too invincible and knocks them down a peg or two.
Sure. Yeah.
Like it is very much more if the party can dish out that kind of damage. And we're looking at a 1-to-1 fight, let's say with street gangers. It would be, I'd say at least one of the gangers might have an SMG and might have like auto fire 10, but just typical booster gang stats otherwise.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I know like my method usually when I'm doing this more across like an adventure, and this is something like I've had to learn over time too. Like this is not something that I came to Cyberpunk Red with like a full fleshed out understanding of it, and I've I've paid for this with my characters' lives a few times. But when you're building an adventure, be mindful of every encounter that they're going to face. So what I've typically like to do, unless there was like a very strong narrative reason to break from this model, what I try to do with my encounters is lean earlier ones in an adventure or in like sections of the campaign where things have lower stakes. I lean the encounters more in the player's favor most of the time, or break it even, like what Diamond was suggesting, where like it's going to either be even or lean toward the player's favor. Because what I then will do is toward the end of an adventure, or like when the stakes ratchet up in an arc of a campaign that I'm running, we'll typically then lean it against the players a bit when they come to that boss fight or something like that. It'll be slightly less fair to the players because that is going to present them a higher degree of challenge, right? Especially, and this is especially true, I think, if you have a lot of hardened players in your group, or if your whole group is hardened. Again, for the rules on that, just so we don't have to repeat them here, the places you can find them are the Hardened Lieutenant and Hardened Mini Bosses DLCs. They describe exactly what makes a hardened party. They're also described in Danger Gal Dossier in the guidelines for making those mooks hardened. So that is definitely something where I would look at that if you aren't sure what that means, and you are looking to maybe have your mooks and your enemies fit a more difficult sort of power level for your players so that they don't just steamroll every single encounter you throw at them. They're giving you too much trouble. Use the hardened enemies. They're still giving you too much trouble. Make things less fair with the hardened enemies. And like do that like a bit at a time. Like these are all going to be minor adjustments that you're going to want to make until you strike that like nice point where like the players don't just steamroll your encounter, but they also aren't steamrolled in the other direction, right? Like you have that back and forth kind of even fight. That's usually where I like to land mine, again, unless there's like a really strong narrative reason why things should be more unfair than that. Which I know like typically, whether it's been, when I've been a player in Diamonds games or running my own, usually those are at the ends of these arcs where you've got these, very powerful people involved, or these very like heavily tuned or augmented cyber psychos, or something approaching a cyber psycho, ready to like just unleash hell on your party. Like that's where it's okay if the balance kind of gets thrown out to an extent there, because at that point your players should be expecting it, and those types of characters should not be pushovers. They should be a problem. They should be treated with respect, and your party should be threatened by them.
I suppose for me, and when I look at how this plays out, when I produce challenging encounters, there's some things that I look for, and it's going to be very much more if the enemy knows what the party is coming with. I tend to look at what the party leans on the hardest, and then it's just like, okay, how do I kick the crutch out from under you?
Sure.
And I've done that with a couple of groups where it's just like they have someone who is, the meta build of linear frame martial arts. Well, it's all fun and games when you're getting ready to snatch up that executive, and then suddenly here you are getting body slammed by executive protection.
Yep. Well, and there's
also got 16.
Right. There's a whole set of mini bosses that are like specifically tailored to actually counter that, which are like the Arasaka assassins. They are straight up built to counter melee solos. I think to like in their perfect degree.
Militech vets are meant to counter ranged.
Yep.
And now I know some people are just like, well, don't mix the mini boss, or like don't mix the mini bosses in with mooks because they're so strong. And I'm like, well, somebody's got to lead the mooks.
Someone's got to lead the mooks, and also there are scenarios. For reference, see the last episode of Neon Inferno we did, where the facility that the players are in is a very secure, very high value facility for the corporation or the group that's being attacked or invaded. And they are going to throw everything they need to until that threat stops moving, right? So that's where these stronger enemies will come into play. Sometimes not even one at a time. Sometimes you'll get 2 or 3 of them. And like, yeah, again, like by the numbers, that greatly outpaces your players. That's okay. Like, understand your players you're not designing it so that your players win every fight. You're designing it so that the players have realistic consequences to the choices that they made. And that is okay. If they bite off a massive amount more than they can chew, they're going to choke on it. And that is like, if you think about going into some of those encounters in 2077 or seeing some of that in the context of Cyberpunk Edgerunners even, we see a couple points in both the game and the anime where that happens. They go in and all of a sudden it gets way more complicated, and things escalate to a degree that they are no longer controllable, right? They're unmanageable. Things spiral wildly out of control in the most violent, unpredictable ways, and someone ends up dead on the other side of that, almost always, right? Now, if your players are smart, it won't be them, but sometimes not even that can like save them. That there's a very real shot that they die, even if they are armed to the teeth, cybered out, and like prepared as they can be for whatever you are throwing at them. There's a very realistic possibility that in those types of encounters, even those types of player characters can die, or at the very least, they'll limp away like wounded to their very last hit point, basically.
I suppose something else I just want to throw out there. It's Night City.
Yeah,
you could be fine. Like everything could just be okay for like a moment. And suddenly, next thing you know, suddenly, boom, you got a big fucking bullet hole in you and your rib is broken.
Yep. Well, and let's, so I guess to kind of even like zoom in on that aspect of it too, to an extent. So I mentioned at the start of the segment a little bit about, if the crew that you're going against, right, doesn't know your group of edge runners well, they may not be as prepared. But if they know your crew has built a name for themselves, and they regularly going around tussling with the local booster gang, or they've gone in and tried to boost stuff from a corporation or their transports. If their faces were on camera, if they, the opposition got a good look somehow, whether by someone got away or a camera survived or some other kind of record survived, contact with the players, if the corp or the group that they're going up against know who they are and what they're capable of to any degree, they're going to take the time to think about preparations for that, right? So again, if you're dealing with a solo who follows the quote unquote meta of like martial arts linear frame, dodge built, they're going to take extra precautions to ensure that the melee solo that can dodge bullets doesn't see the bullet coming. Because remember, your players can only dodge what they know is coming, even if that is a gunshot, right? So if a sniper is hidden on a rooftop far away and the players don't see them, then it means that sniper is going to get some free shots, or at least a free shot in the direction of some of these characters that otherwise could dodge the rounds. And those shots can make all the difference, right? Especially if they're like an aimed shot or something intended to cripple the edge runner. That can start taxing them pretty quickly, right? Start stacking up that stat debt, the injury debt, all of that kind of stuff. And that preparedness matters. The reboot to the head, says Mark of Corn. Yes, exactly. Sometimes that is like what will quite literally happen to your players. And there's only so much you can do to prepare for that when you are relatively fresh in the game. Like obviously down the road, you can afford things like a cyber skull to like mitigate the odds of that hurting you as deeply. But like till you have the kind of money that you can chrome yourself out in luxury goods, you're in trouble. Like, and your players should be aware of that like they might feel on top of the world when they're up against, John Scavlord number 5, but the moment that they go up against any real corporate threat, right? Even some of the corporate lieutenants and stuff, they should feel the friction. That heat should be apparent. Even if they can still manage it, it should be notable the second that they come up against that oh, this isn't your average like corner booster ganger anymore that might just be hopped up on some lace. Like this is a genuine potential threat. And if things don't go my way for even a couple of rounds, this could get ugly very fast. Like that should be the first thing you're kind of looking at.
I suppose looking at that in mind, and also prepper jack, like sometimes like just random encounter, like sometimes these random encounters don't fall to your favor. I mean, heck, I was with Sasha, and we had kicked off a home game with a GM, and it was just us two because the other players couldn't make it, so we decided an introductory mission, and the GM just decided, okay, random encounter. So we have a fixer and a lawman, all right? Cyber Psycho encounter. Right out the fucking gate.
Yep. Oh, how'd that go?
I nearly got plastered. But I ended up with it being, in the 2070s, it was 2078, we were able to at least get max stack out there at a decent point, but it was just like, not without, the Cyber Psycho picking up Sasha's character, and, also a little bit of a berating after of like, stop trying to fucking play hero.
Right. Yeah.
By the way, players, you don't have to be hero. You don't have to go headlong into if you want to get remembered as a big shot, do it. Go
Yeah.
headlong into danger. Do it. Take those risks. But if you want to play it safe, sure you can. But even corps have a way for dealing with people that play it safe. Because today, actually, I had a group that, you know, one of them accidentally fumbled a tear gas grenade like just inside the door. So there's this cloud of tear gas like just inside the door. So some of the players actually went into the building that they were supposed to be dealing with it. And well, some of the others just kept popping into the doorway and then backing up, popping into the doorway, backing up after shooting. So the netrunner in the group inside the building shuttered all the doors shut with emergency shutters. So yeah, be mindful that, you know, sometimes players might try to, you know, play it safe, and sometimes playing it safe does not pay out.
Right. Well, and there is a time to be a hero. There are times we have to choose them and be like very knowing of the fact that like you could just die, right? That is a very likely even outcome to doing that, right? At the bare minimum, it's a reasonable outcome, and at the worst, it is a likely outcome if you decide to play hero in certain scenarios, right? And sometimes it pays out. Sometimes you can play the hero and actually make it count for something. I've always said the death of a cyberpunk character is not the end of the world. If anything, it's a great opportunity for you to leave your mark on a setting and like make sure that the people who survived that, it becomes fuel on their fire to like carry on that character's memory and do whatever comes next because of them, right? And in light of them. And for the player that died, you know, for the player character that died, you as the player, if that's your character that just got wiped, you have a chance to try something new now. You get to come in with like some of that knowledge that maybe you didn't have when you rolled the first character. Or maybe you have taken a liking to an aspect of the setting that the previous character just wasn't well suited for. If you do that and you have now an opportunity to kind of like explore that and build in a way that like lets you more easily explore elements of the story that you enjoy, you've just been given a golden opportunity to do exactly that. So that's the other thing that some of these less than fair encounters bring to the table is the possibility to grant that opportunity to your players and to have them do some really cool stuff. The best moments in Cyberpunk are not the ones where playing it safe is the right call. It's when all the odds are stacked up against the players and they choose to do something actually really dangerous and impressive despite those odds. You know, some of those stories that we all talk about later come to the surface and really come bubble up out of that. So I suppose a final note that I will make on kind of like GM encounter design here before we get over to Diamond's angle of this, because we're kind of beginning to approach that end of the discussion a little closer here. Do not forget about all of the people that exist on both sides of the conflict. And what I mean by that is the conflict itself, the encounter you've designed, is not always just the people in the room. Sometimes it's the people that those groups can call on. This is true of both the players and the enemies. If the enemy faction that they're up against have friends in powerful places, sometimes out of nowhere, those people will arrive to complicate things even further. And GMs, you get bonus points if that extra help somehow ties into a player character's backstory. Because now it becomes personal. Now that fight that they might have thought of running from now, suddenly running isn't the right call, or at least it's not an obvious one anymore. Because now this is their chance to maybe finish it, right? This is the chance they have to end that fight that they've been fighting for a long time. that dude across the alley from them, this shit's personal now, right? Like, they want that fucker dead. So what do? You either can still choose to run because it's just not gonna happen. Today's not the day. Or maybe, in truly dramatic and, in my opinion, the most cyberpunk fashion possible, they say, fuck it, ride the edge, and they draw that gun and they go for their mortal enemy. And it turns into this, that's where the epic shit kicks in. That's where the bass drops and everything gets turned up to 11. It's beautiful. So yeah, allow for the encounter to spill into something as well, especially if you think it's going down too fast. Remember, GMs especially, like, we have power to fudge the numbers. And that doesn't just mean the things that are already on the battlefield. We have the ability to fudge new enemies onto the battlefield. And I know, Diamond, like, you've done that before. You've done that a couple times.
What?
Yeah.
Nah.
Yeah, nah.
I would never.
Yeah, okay.
No.
I know. There was a second pack of iron sights when the first one went down in a single round. That you're like, well, they're calling in reinforcements. And they had a prototype gun. And then we still downed them. And you're like, shit, I can't do it another time. So then you made that a complication for me down the road. So that's where I mean, like, even if it's beyond the bounds of a single encounter, there's always room for the actions or the effects of an encounter to spill outward, and it makes problems that your players aren't going to resolve by simply shooting at them most of the time. So that is kind of my advice, is always look for opportunities to truly complicate the battlefield, to truly make problems for the players.
I suppose on top of that, there's one other encounter that I wanted to talk about as well. Is social encounters. Just before we move forward, sometimes some fights are fought over glasses glasses of poisoned wine at a table, where it's a situation of figuring out who's got what glass, who's got more power, and who's strutting what by the end of that negotiation.
Yep. That's also
I'd imagine, you look at someone, for example, like Mr. K. He doesn't have fighting prowess, or he might, but very likely he prefers not to fight.
Right.
But what he doesn't wield normally, and in his martial ability, all it takes is for him to make one phone call and put enough money in front of the right suit, and then suddenly all of Militech is crawling up your asshole because you pissed off Mr. K.
Yep.
Or in the case of Rex, you don't get to set one foot in one block without any of the locals going for that bounty on your head, because Rex said this person's no longer allowed in one block.
Right. I mean, it's Rex reminds me, the more that, like, canonical Rex, like the Rex that I play in Neon Inferno, is kind of our initial conception of who he was, my friends and me, back when we first picked up the Jumpstart kit, which very early version of things, very undecided, but that version of Rex feels right to us, where he's more, suave gentleman, kind of mafioso, not so much the leader of the destitute people of one block. But in canonical terms, he reminds me more of the King from John Wick, the kind of pigeon master, right? Mm-hmm. He's got a finger in a lot of different places in the city, a lot of them the dark holes that no one pays attention to, and when he makes the call, those holes start teeming and they come crawling out, and they could come for the players. So, like, there aren't safe places to hide when the gutters, alleyways, and destitute areas of the city are suddenly at the beck and call of a single fixer. It gets very dangerous very fast for players in an environment like that. So that is definitely a fair point made.
Also, it's all it takes is one social faux pas, and you are very much, getting, a bullet to the brain at the table.
Yep. I mean, that's the true thing there. It's like, if you don't show respect where it's due in the city, the street doesn't tolerate disrespect. Unless you are big enough to deal with the consequences of that disrespect, the street doesn't tolerate that disrespect. You will be summarily taken out of the program one way or another. It might not happen in the 5 seconds after the disrespect is issued, but you can bet your ass if it's a big enough person that you've made an enemy of, give them maybe a week. Most would be even quicker than that, but give them a week tops. You'll find out why what you did was a horrible mistake, and the only thing you can pray for is you get to learn from it, because the alternative is you end up in the bay, and that is truly how it can come to an end. Diamond, unless there's more you want to say on this particular topic, I think that's as good a segue as any to kind of start leaning over into your topic here in a moment.
Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and get ready to move over to the new topic then.
Beautiful. All right. So, guys, if you are watching this on YouTube, this is the part where we go over to Diamond. This week, more than usual, I highly recommend watching both parts of the episode. I know, based on just viewership and stuff, we don't always see people view both halves. So if you've missed a half of this episode, this first part is kind of the introduction. Now we're going to talk about the really fun stuff, especially those GMs out there who, like me, take a little bit of glee in presenting problems, deep problems to your players and seeing how they work their way out of it. We're going to kind of shift into that topic here in just a moment. So again, if you're on YouTube, links down below to go to Diamond's video on this next topic. But we're going to start talking about making hard choices. So for those of you, though, who are with us on Twitch or on Spotify, just give us a moment as we kind of shift some things around, and we'll get right on to the topic.